Morning Year 3, welcome to your Monday's English lesson. Now we are going to be continuing with our story, which was based in Pompeii, and our characters Liv and Tranio were just at the theatre, but things had started to go a little bit wrong. Now, today we are only going to be focusing on two learning chunks. Now, that is simply because they are a little bit longer than usual and they kind of fit within the same picture. So that's the only reason it's a bit different today. So this is the picture that we looked at yesterday. So we started to see some detail about the theatre and then also started to be able to gauge people's reactions to what was going on. We can see the stones are falling and a few cracks and stuff like that. Okay, so this is our first initiate for today, and we're going to be focusing on a little bit of speech. So during the time when all these things are starting to collapse and break and everything, what might the actors or Liv and Tranio be saying to each other? So in your first box, can you jot down some ideas and think about using your inverted commas in your speech marks, please? Okay, so I've got some ideas of run, careful, the building's falling down. What is happening? So it could be questions, it could be exclamations, it could just be statements. So it's really up to you what you decide to do in that speech. But I doubt that they're probably going to be having a chat about what they want for dinner. They're probably more worried about what on earth is going on. Okay, let's have a look at our next initiate. So we're talking about what they said, but what was happening as they were shouting. So we talked in the previous paragraph a little bit about the fact that, walls were cracking, stones were falling, but let's think about it in a little bit more detail. So in your second box, could you write down some action sentences or some action phrases? What was happening as they were shouting or talking to each other? Okay, so we could have things like the building was cracking, the stones were breaking, the ground was shaking. We're just going to kind of like re-emphasize that from the previous paragraph, so it's really obvious what's going on. This wasn't a one-time thing. This is continuous. It's going on for a while. People are starting to get a little bit worried. So we're going to use both the speech and the action to now create our first learning chunk for today. So, run! Shouted an actor in panic. What's happening? Cried someone as they looked on at the cracking stone in terror. So, I'm going to change this very slightly so it makes grammatical sense, as they looked on at the cracking stones in terror as well. So I've used two bits of speech here, my run and what is happening. I haven't used said both times. I've changed my said word to make it something a little bit more exciting and a little bit more interesting. I have then also added some detail using my action sentence as they looked on at the cracking stones in terror. I've also added a little bit of information here when I'm talking about the actor. I haven't just put run, shouted an actor. This in panic bit, just add a little bit more detail, just little things like this throughout your writing will really help it to up level it, make it more interesting and just really make it a bit more sophisticated. And especially now that we're halfway through year 3, little things like that will really help. So for your first learning chunk today, I'm going to give you 5 to 7 minutes and I'd like you to use some dialogue to show what the actors were saying and also use an action sentence to show me what was happening at the same time, please. So 5 to 7 minutes, off you go. Okay, let's have a look at our second picture for today. So we've now moved on to a little bit extra here. And this is Liv and Tranio, who are now looking on at the street that they live in. And we can start to see that everybody is really panicked. Everybody is kind of like rushing around, running around, holding different things. Maybe they're taking things out of their home. But we've also got this huge cloud of smoke that is just starting to appear over the harbour there. So we're not 100% sure what it is yet, but we can make some really good guesses, especially if you lived there, you might be able to guess. So we're going to use this picture for our next two initiates. So the first one is all about hearing. So the picture is still down here for you, but what kind of things do you think that the pair could hear? Can you jot them down in your third box, please? Right, so some ideas that I've got: screaming, crying, shouting. So those kind of things we can hear. Probably not going to hear laughter or giggles or things like that this time. So our last initiate for today is we're going to think about a prepositional phrase. So prepositions tell us where things are. We looked at these in the SPAG lesson last term. So can you tell me, where could they hear the screaming, the crying and the shouting, please? Jot that down in your fourth and final box. Okay. So in the streets or beneath Liv's house, when they got outside, that's not really a place prepositional phrase, that's a time prepositional phrase. So if we could change that to outside, that tells me where something's happening. So all those things. Again, look, I've used my apostrophe for possession. The home belongs to Liv, so she needs that apostrophe for possession. So we are now going to talk about the things that we could hear and where they could hear them in our next learning chunk. Out on the street, they could hear people shouting, arguing and screaming. Everyone was rushing into their homes to get their belongings. The streets were filling up with people. It was getting harder and harder to get through. So we're going to start with that prepositional phrase, that place adverb, and then we are going to talk about the things that we could hear using those ing words: shouting, arguing and screaming. Whatever word you decide to put in there, try and make sure they're ing words. And then I've added a little bit of detail about what was actually going on the street. So as we saw in the picture, everyone's kind of like rushing in and out of their houses, getting their belongings. They're not 100% sure what's going on, but they know that they want to leave where they are. And then this idea of getting harder and harder to get through, the streets were just clogging up. Everyone was all out of their houses. They're coming on the streets. They were trying to leave. And it was just really, really busy. Think when we're trying to get out of the assembly hall, we used to have assemblies, and how that was all clogged up. Imagine that when you're trying to flee from a potential natural disaster. So could you now start with a place adverb, say your ing words, and then give a little bit more detail. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this, please. And then come back to me when you've done. Okay, so that was a little bit of a shorter lesson today, but hopefully you've used the time to only have 2 learning chunks to really focus on the detail that you're putting in your writing. So you should have had all the correct speech that was going on in the first learning chunk, and then using those prepositional phrases. Maybe you've thrown in some time adverbs, some fringed adverbials, all of those things. You don't need reminding anymore, you know how to do them, and I'd love to see them in your writing really independently. So tomorrow will be a SPAG lesson for you, and then on Wednesday we will be continuing with our story. So I will see you tomorrow. Bye guys.